The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. This podcast is a complement to the Numinous School, an online intuition development course for people who want their self-awareness to serve a greater good. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, and this week my guest is Indigo Ocean Dutton. Indigo has an extensive background working with youth and in volunteerism. She's the founder of the Phone Buddies peer counseling community. She's also an entrepreneur and self-made millionaire and the author of two books, one called Being Bliss and the other is Micro Habits for Major Happiness. I connected with Indigo over the phone. She was at home in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, Indigo, you mentioned on your website in the description of your book, Being Bliss, that you struggled with depression at a very early age, and your first suicide attempt came when you were 9 years old. And I have an 11-year-old daughter, so when I think about her at this age going through that, it's hard for me to imagine what might be going through her mind that might lead her to be that depressed and want to take that kind of action. So I'm wondering if you can remember what the internal dialogue was like for you at 9 years old that made you feel that way.
Yeah. Actually, I would go back a little bit further. I remember when I was about 7 years old, coming to the conclusion one day as I sat in reflection in my room that I just really didn't like this life thing. I wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't very pleasant. So I went to my mother and I said, I wish I had never been born. Now, I think at some level, a 7-year-old's mind is not very complex. So, I don't know what kind of response I really expected. She was just like the person I told stuff to. So I'd come to this groundbreaking understanding. So I shared it with her. Of course, from her side, she was working unbelievably hard as a single mother, trying to support me and my two older sisters. And she had a 3.5-hour daily commute that was like 2 buses and 2 trains in each direction, and then had to, probably a very stressful job throughout the day. And so for her, she just heard ingratitude. And so she just got very, very angry. So then I learned, okay, well, won't be sharing those ideas with or feelings with anybody. And so then a couple years later, I guess, my ability to understand things was developing, my self-awareness was developing, and my ability to see that I could do things in the world, that I could make choices and that I could make things happen was growing. I wasn't just, waiting for other people to solve my problems. So when those thoughts and feelings came up again of, I'm just not enjoying this, no thanks, I knew how to take action. I found some chemicals in my older sister's chemistry set that said lethal if swallowed. Mm-hmm. So I thought, that should do the trick. So I swallowed them. Needless to say, it was false advertising. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, I really sucked at suicide for a very, very long time. And by the time I got good at it, I had a reason to stop doing it.
But how long did you struggle with the suicidal thoughts?
I think my last attempt was at age 21. And what happened at age 21 is I got good enough at it to wind up hospitalized. Mm-hmm. And because I was hospitalized for the first time, my family had to deal with it. And by then I also had a little sister. I had a sister who was 9 years younger than me. So this was the first time she also found out. And I was always, even though I wasn't really very happy, I was very successful in life, actually. I was making a lot of stuff happen from a very early age. I created a summer camp when I was 15. Mm-hmm. So I was making stuff happen. I just wasn't happy. So I'd always been very motivational towards other people and especially my little sister. So when my little sister found out that I had attempted suicide and been hospitalized, it was just so devastating to her that I realized I couldn't leave intentionally while she was still alive, that I had to somehow find a way to stay in the game, at least through my intent and my conscious effort. I think I secretly kind of kept hoping I'd, get hit by piece of
Right.
falling space debris or something.
Right.
But I had to show up for her and set a certain standard for her because I didn't want her to give up on her life.
And why do you think you were so despairing for all those years?
Well, I think there are a couple things to do with it. I think one is a little bit, biochemistry. I think that just in my family, there's a biochemical balance that towards depression. And so we have to counteract that with things like exercise and, eating habits and sleeping habits and things like that, because our tendency will be in that direction. There's a lot of people in my family who struggled with depression. I was just probably the most proactive person in saying, okay, well, I don't have to, you know, I don't have to stay then in that case. And then I think the other part of it was I was a much more spiritual person than most people in my family. My family's fairly spiritual in general. Like I knew my astrological sign before I could write my name.
What is your sign?
Aquarius. Aquarius is my sun sign, and then Cancer moon and Taurus rising. And so I knew this kind of stuff. So in that sense, I mean, we played with Ouija boards and all that kind of stuff when I was a kid. But I think that in terms of having a deep personal relationship with spirituality, I was more of that than the rest of my family. And so I think that this awareness that's growing now in the world, which at that time wasn't very pervasive, of, life is for you. And the point of life is enjoying it. Like this is, your life is not supposed to be about suffering. I had an intuitive knowing of that, and yet my life was nothing but suffering. We were very poor. I was hungry a lot. We lived in New York, and it's very cold in New York, and I had only canvas sneakers. I had no boots. So if it snowed, I'd be up to my ankles and just soaking wet and cold all day. Life was hard, and I was worried all the time because my mother was worried all the time. Would we have food? Would we keep the electric on? Would we keep the phone on? Would we be able to pay the rent? And when you're really young, it's like you can't do anything about that. I mean, I would go through the house in the middle of the night, turning the heat off until I got caught, and I would develop an allergy to milk. But then we discovered I was only allergic to milk at home. I could drink it at school, and it was just like, So I took a lot on, and at the same time, I had this feeling that life was supposed to be different. And so this tension, when you put it all together, it just was like just a recipe for having a very difficult time coping.
So tell me about the moment or the first time you can remember the switch flicking, like the light going on, that you could actually choose to be in bliss. You could actually choose to follow your intuitive sense that life was meant to be enjoyed. How did that come to you, and how did that become your action of choice?
I think it was a very slow progression, actually. I think the first thing was simply making the commitment to stay. That has to be there. And so for me, I couldn't do it for myself, but I could do it for someone else that I loved, who I felt responsible for as well. And so once I made that commitment, then it was like, okay, well, now I've got to really learn how to make this work, because this is just too hard like this. So I really dedicated myself to self-improvement and to learning how to be happy in life. And, I learned meditation. I started going to things like, sound healing events. I moved to San Francisco from the East Coast. And so out here, people were more attuned to these kinds of things just in general. I started reading books like, I think the first book that really had a big effect on me, well, I think the first one was The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. So that had a big effect on me. And then the next one that had a big effect was The Lazy Man's Guide to Enlightenment, which is a tiny little paperback, but it's like, this sums it up. This is everything right here. And then I started reading books like The Holographic Universe, which, just presented, had always been really into physics. And so it brought together spirituality and physics for me in a really convincing way. And so it was like, a lot of it was books, really. And I just was learning and practicing. I was experimenting with my life, because I felt like, well, what do I have to lose? I'm stuck here and this isn't working. So I might as well just experiment with other ways of living and other belief systems and see if they do any better for me than the belief system that I was brought up with has done for me. And by the time, the real like clear turning point that I could see a big difference though, where I kind of turned a corner, was when I went to Bali in Indonesia, and I spent a year living in Bali.
What were you doing there?
I taught dance, I studied dance, I wrote a lot of the material that eventually became Being Bliss. But really, more importantly than anything, I sat on the deck watching the mountains come in and out of view from behind the clouds. I sat there. The first 4 months I was there, I just sat on the deck watching the sky all day. And I had a pimbantu, a household helper, so she would do the shopping and cooking. And so I had meals, and she would make breakfast and lunch for me, and then I'd have leftover lunch for dinner. And I barely left my house. I occasionally left my house. I'd walk over, meet neighbors, meet other Westerners and stuff. So I had some connections that were growing, but I mostly just sat and I let so much just kind of melt away. I always say the process of awakening isn't the process of taking on ideas. It's the process of letting go of ideas, because awakening is our true state. That's our natural state, right? So I just sat and I let what was false melt away. And then, yeah.
Go ahead.
Then after about 4 months, I just had this inspiration to get up and to go out. And so I went to a restaurant, and then I met someone there, and they invited me to a party. And then at the party I met people. And so that social thing started happening a little bit more. There were more times when I just felt like spontaneously getting up and going somewhere. And every single time there would be an opportunity that would come and lay itself at my feet. Like things I had been trying to make happen for a decade in San Francisco, like just working so hard to try to make creatively happen, sacred arts events. I would have, these events, and there would be like 10 people who would come, and they would love it, but there would only be 10 people. Or I would, try modeling, or I was just doing all these different kinds of things, dancing, trying to perform, professionally. And there it was like, oh, I hear that you're into sacred arts. Well, I've just come back from this conference on it, and I have all this, basically capital from my businesses, and I know how to run a business, but I don't know how to do the content part. Can we collaborate, and I'll put on the event and you just do the content? And I was like, sure. And so we had this like sold out, even though it was like a monsoon that night, it was sold out, standing room only sacred arts event that was like this huge hit that like I'd never had that scale of success. Or it's like, oh, we're making this, international natural beauty book, and we'd like you to represent the United States. And I'm like, sure. And then like Tina Turner buys 50 copies of the book.
So great.
Who's like one of my few idols is Tina Turner.
Tell me what you mean when you say sacred arts.
So sacred arts, it would be like, in my case, I was especially into dance, and I was teaching ecstatic dance, which now has come to have a certain name to it. Like there's an actual style of dance called that, but at that time that wasn't the case. And so all it meant was more of a channeled dance. So if I would perform it, I would be watching the dance happen the same as anyone else, even though it was my body moving. I wasn't making my body move. I was allowing it to move, and I was allowing spirit to express itself through my form in synchronization and responsiveness with the music, which works particularly well when there are live musicians, because they're really doing the same thing. And so we're all channeling from these kind of different wavelengths. There's sound, motion. And so I performed that also, which, performing that for Balinese people is really different than performing it for Westerners. Because when you perform it for Westerners, they'll say things like, wow, that was so beautiful. That was captivating. I felt like I was transported, which is great, right? But when you perform it for Balinese, they'll be like, first, I saw Krishna. And then I saw Govinda. And then I saw Gopala. Like it's real to them. Like, those were the deities I was thinking about in those moments, actually. There's a real something that happens for them.
So then you go back to the United States, and you are a prolific entrepreneur. You founded many companies, and you actually work in business technology. Have I got that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was my first large company. I do less of that now.
Okay, so that was the company where you became a self-made millionaire.
Yeah.
And now it sounds like you're doing more sort of personal coaching and consulting. Is that true?
Yeah. One of the really cool things about having done Aspiritech, which was the, corporate business technology company. Okay, so first I did love doing it at the time. I'm kind of over it now because I just did it so much. But I was able to leverage the kind of money that you make in something like that into other forms of revenue streams. And so then that allowed me to create passive income streams. So that took a lot of pressure off me. Kind of like the time in Indonesia took a certain kind of pressure off me that allowed me to tap into a life of allowing and of allowing yourself to be blessed instead of trying to make everything happen. It was that turning point for me. And I think getting to that point where I was supported by passive income was a different kind of turning point because now there was no longer this little girl afraid she wasn't going to be able to survive because there was no one to buy food and there was no one to guaranteed pay the rent. And now that was taken care of. And I didn't have to do anything to have it taken care of. And so for the first time, it was like ideas started coming through. And that was when I realized like I really like helping people to do what I've done. I want to work with this one person that is just this human across from me, and I want to help them see how they can use the process of healing their relationship with work and money and their business as a part of their path of spiritual awakening. Like I want to help them unite those two things so that the incredible abundance of your natural self as it exists in your spiritual truth also exists in your work in the world as equally true. And these two things are not divided.
So if your younger you could see your current you in the world, what do you think she would see?
Well, I think, if I go back to really, really, really young, she'd be like, wow, okay, so I guess this is worthwhile. Because eventually I get to the fun part,
Right.
you know?
And if you now could go back and talk to the younger you, what would you say?
I'd say, hang in there. There really is a fun part to this. I realize this part is really hard and there's just nothing to be done about that. This is what it is. But just know that you're on the right path.
So for you today, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of your spiritual life right now?
You know, I can't honestly say anything is challenging right now. In all honesty, I'm not into doing challenge anymore. I'm completely committed to the easy way. And I'm simply just like waking up each day and just saying, okay, wow, what a juicy day ahead. And I lie there in bed. I don't get up until something launches me out of bed. If I don't feel something is propelling me out of bed that I can't wait to do, I just lie there feeling good, enjoying how it feels to be in my bed. And then eventually a thought will come through my mind, and it's usually like something I want to create or I do custom work for my clients. So I'm constantly creating materials that take this person to the next step from where they are. And so I'll have an idea that'll come through and I'm so excited about doing it. I'll just like kind of jump up out of the bed. And then I move through the day in a fairly similar way. I'm constantly reminding myself that all is Dharma, that my life is being lived through me, not by me. I'm constantly reminding myself to give credit for the big successes to that which moves through me, and only see the little steps. I wrote, I got this email out, whatever. Okay, that's me. That's my little ego self using my intellect of things I've learned how to do and applying those skills. And that's all good too. But that's pushing things along. And there's only so far I'm going to get with that. When I want the wind at my back and I want to like really make things happen, I know that I get out of the way and I don't try to take ownership for that. So I would say my biggest spiritual practice is really that. It's just like staying focused on really savoring every moment and realizing this is the life I came to live. It's not in the future. My future is now. This is what my enlightenment looks like right now. And it will change on its own.
So, what do you think of discipline in a spiritual context?
I think early on, it's very important. I think, like even in meditation, first you learn concentration meditation. And then once you have the ability to actually meditate when you sit to meditate, you can do awareness meditations where you're watching the arising of emotions, for example, or watching the arising of thought. And therefore you're able to learn things experientially like, wow, thoughts, feelings, they just kind of come up on their own. There doesn't need to be something causing them. That means they're not objectively real. That means I have choices about emotions. I'm not controlled by them. Wow, I never knew that before. You can learn things like that experientially, but first there needs to be the discipline that you can sit there focused on your inner experience. And that's where concentration meditation prepares you.
So aside from meditation, what would you say is one of your favorite ways to express your devotion to spirit?
I walk my dog every day, and nature is beautiful, and my dog is happy, and I know that I'm making her happy. But my neighbors, I live in a very friendly neighborhood, but my neighbors will tell me, why do you always walk along looking down? We'll be waving at you, and you don't even see us. And it's like, it's because my dog is so cute, and she's so happy. That a lot of the time I'm walking, I just enjoy watching her bounce along so happy. And I enjoy watching her enjoying herself.
Yeah, that's awesome. What kind of dog do you have?
She's half Maltese and half poodle. So she's a mixture.
What a
She's
cutie.
very fluffy and curly and super friendly and super happy.
Nice. Okay. So the last question on the Numinous podcast comes from the Proust questionnaire. And it is, what do you consider perfect happiness?
I would say, accepting the present moment, whatever it contains, like deciding that, okay, I say yes. That's perfect happiness.
I'm so glad you said yes to being on the show. Thank you so much for being on the Numinous podcast.
Oh, thank you. Nice to be here.
I first contacted Indigo and wanted her on the show because I was attracted by the organization she started called Phone Buddies Peer Counseling Community. When I was in my 20s, I volunteered on a crisis line and I did suicide awareness talks in high schools for youth. And so I thought, oh, wow, we have this interesting thing in common. But then the more I started to reach out and get to know her and research her, the more I started to think about two words, resilience and inspiration. There aren't too many people that I meet that make me wish I'd get off my ass and do something with my life, but she's definitely one of them. So I highly recommend that you check out her book, Being Bliss. And if you go to my website and click on the podcast link, you'll find the show notes with links to her book and also the 3 that she recommended. I, too, also highly recommend Joseph Campbell, anything by him, but particularly The Power of Myth. Very good introduction. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for sharing the show with people if you like it. Japan, you're up. It's your turn. I'd like to say thank you to all of the listeners in Japan. It's a tremendous honor, a deep bow to you for spending time connecting with your soul and with like-hearted souls around the world by listening to the podcast today. I really sincerely appreciate it. And if you'd like to keep exploring the great mystery of life with me, you can just go to my website, carmenspagnola.com, CarmenSpagnola. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter. You'll instantly receive a free meditation download, and I'll let you know every time I publish a new show. Until next time, take care.